What situation is introvert's nightmare? Story 1. The video game industry is often romanticized by kids and teens who dream of working in it because they grew up playing games and feel that games transport them to another world. However, the reality is very different. Creating video games is all about math and physics and has little to do with the joy of playing them. It's long hours spent coding, dealing with polygons, and facing constant criticism. Even worse, if you make games, you probably won't have time to play them anymore. The gaming industry is notorious for implementing 60, 80-hour work weeks. As if that wasn't tough enough, you'll likely never work on a game you're passionate about. The big exciting games and indie hits on Steam are only a small fraction of what's out there. Barbie's Horse Adventure? Those developers have the same degrees and were inspired by the same games as you. Crappy mobile games? Same story. Simple board games you see in the family section at the store? They also require game designers and programmers. Don't get into video games because you love playing them. Get into video games because you're passionate about math and science. Story 2. I don't know if nightmare is the right word, but my wife has finally reached her lifelong goal of becoming a zookeeper at one of the top zoos in the US. She loves the opportunity to hand food to otters, have reindeer eat out of her hand, and brush okapi. However, she took on tens of thousands of dollars in student loans and did months of unpaid work at the zoo to get the job, which is seasonal, requiring her to be off 2 months a year. She gets up at 4 a.m. and does farmhand-style physical labor for 8 hours a day for about $9 an hour with no benefits. I am thrilled that she reached her goal, and I'm happy that she is happy, but I am pretty disillusioned with the whole situation. Story 3. I was one of those smart kids who planned to do it short-term out of college before going to a master's program, but figured if I liked it, I'd be open to staying. I'd sum it up as fun at first because you're probably consulting on something you find interesting, but it gets worse over time. You'll probably be good at it because it's interesting and you're smart. People will recognize you're good at it and thank you by giving you more work. We want to give you more responsibility, they'll say, as if it's a promotion. But at least it's interesting work. If you're really good at it, people will recognize it by boosting your ego to get on your good side. This actually helped me in hindsight. I needed more confidence in my ability coming out of college, but there were times I'd think back to some interactions and realize I'd been quite arrogant. The work doesn't stop, though. After a while, you'll learn that if you really want the big bucks, you'll spend more of your time finding people with money and convincing them you're really smart and that they should trust you with their investments. If you succeed, you'll get to pass the actual work on to someone else while you focus on securing more projects. Now you're a company person, and your life revolves around building the company rather than building a good life with the money they're paying you. I was really happy when I turned in my resignation to go to grad school. Story 4. Architecture is really tough. Most people don't complete the program, and the mental health issues are quite serious. There's a lot of criticism and stress in the beginning, lots of late nights and hard work. In the end, your work is often criticized publicly. There's no real reason for this. You're not saving lives, so it shouldn't be so expensive or demanding. So 3 years later, you get a degree and have to do a year of intern work. Then it's time for another year of study, projects, and exams. Then 2 years of minimum wage work. Then you come back for more exams, essays, and projects. It's really too difficult for what it is. I get paid very poorly, and I don't really use much of my training. It feels pointless, but at least people find it interesting when I say I'm an architect. That's not really true. I don't go to social events because I have no social life. Story 5. Veterinary medicine, certified vet tech. I was a tech for 4 years before I left. The work is physically demanding and clinic-owning vets are often very cost-conscious. You're bitten, scratched, occasionally left to handle a 95-pound dog on your own, and if you work in a mixed practice, you can also get seriously injured. And these were the things I was reasonably okay with dealing with. All for a wage that's hardly enough to live on. Hope you've got roommates or a spouse who makes a decent income. Then you have the owners, the ones who call you unpleasant names because your clinic doesn't offer payment plans anymore, thanks to the last 50 people who never paid, and because you have the audacity to charge an exam fee at the very least. The ones who don't train their purse dogs and then blame you when you get bitten because Fifi is a little terror. And your patient's dying. Some you know it's coming, but you're trying valiantly to save them. And others pass away unexpectedly, from something like a blood clot after surgery, Or something we never get to diagnose because what's the point of an autopsy for a family pet? There's a reason the suicide rates among veterinarians are so high, and a reason a lot of educated veterinary technicians, basically animal RNs, we did everything but diagnose, prescribe, make a prognosis, and perform surgery, don't last long in the profession. Story 6. Film crew work. Yes, you sometimes meet famous people. Sometimes they're cool, often they're really not. The days are 14+ hours of work with a commute of who knows how long on either end, depending on where you're shooting. You have half an hour for lunch. Breaks are whenever you're not needed on set. So depending on your job, I was in camera, and we rarely had a down moment. It could be almost never. More often than not, someone on set is yelling. People lose their minds over making really low-quality entertainment. You start work by 7 a.m. on Monday, and by Friday you're coming in at 4 p.m. and leaving when the sun comes up on Saturday. There are no paid holidays, no paid sick days, no paid vacation. If you don't work enough qualifying hours, the union cancels your health care. And this is if you're in a union. Non-union is much worse. Harassment is through the roof, but the young people who get it the worst are afraid to say anything or they'll lose their jobs. I've heard some real horror stories about famous actors, some of whom still haven't been outed by the Me Too movement. And I'm not talking secondhand stories. I'm talking about young women who quietly warn each other what shows to avoid and make them swear to never use their name, because if they want to work in this industry, they can't be known as a troublemaker. I watch so many coworkers fall into unhealthy habits, lose family, miss their children's lives, all over the most meaningless TV shows in the world. If you go union, the money can be good, but it's not worth it. It's just not worth it. Story 7. Law enforcement. I went into it with the naive belief I would be making a difference. I wanted to protect people and make my community safer. Instead, I got to see the worst humanity has to offer day in and day out. Let's see if I can list all the negatives. Most departments are filled with arrogant people with inflated egos who love to condescend to other officers or the public when they themselves can barely read. Many officers have severe anger issues and love to take it out on the public. Never saw it happen physically but verbally, or by issuing every ticket possible. Try to suggest changes to bring about better relations with the public. Prepare to be ostracized and bullied until you fall in line. The overall level of incompetence is staggering, with some officers barely knowledgeable of the firearms they carry every day. Your view of the public and people in general becomes very dark. The amount of people with mental health issues, drug dependencies, and alcoholism you deal with each day is overwhelming, and you start to wonder how society hasn't collapsed. You arrest a violent offender just to see them quickly released over and over again. What's worse is how often abuse victims file complaints because you arrested their love despite them almost being killed. Very few people are actually grateful when you give them a break. They take it as a sign of weakness and try to push the envelope. This is an often overlooked reason why some officers become hardened. You try to help people out and they take advantage of it, which gradually wears you down until you can barely recognize what you are becoming. The uniform is a target. You can be the nicest, most patient officer in the world, but to many, the uniform means you are the enemy. You will get cursed at, attacked, and have your private life exposed. Low pay is not even remotely commensurate with what you have to deal with. There is so much more. But I was lucky enough to get out and change careers before it all really got to me. Story 8. This is kind of niche, but I was a scuba dive instructor for about 3 years. I can't begin to tell you how many times people wish they had my job. A decent portion of the job was selling. I hate pushing people to buy things, but I had to have a certain percentage of people buy a mask at least. The mask was about 25% of the cost of an open water course. Chances are they'd never use it again. Dive shop politics are intense. I worked 6.5 days a week for 90% of the year. If I turned down a course, I wouldn't be given another until there were no other instructors available. If there were no courses going on, I still had to be in the shop in case someone came in. During slow times, there would be 7 or 8 instructors hanging around doing nothing. We all lived less than 5 minutes away. My dive shop would only hire people who were attractive enough. They'd also refuse to hire people who had trained at certain other dive schools in the area. The owners would go out of their way to be charming to the customers and then mock them as soon as they were out the door. The amount of responsibility is huge, and nobody even thinks about it until you point it out. You're taking 4 people into a deadly environment and have to bring them back in the same state they went in. If something goes wrong, you can lose your license or face legal consequences. Where I was working, these were pretty exclusively early to mid-20-year-olds. Not only that, but if someone you trained has an incident later on, you can also be investigated and possibly prosecuted. I was diving in 30 degrees Celsius, 86 degrees Fahrenheit water. I constantly had an infection. Could be from a small cut, or my ears, or my throat. It was constant. Long, very hard work days. 12-hour days were the norm. I'd teach, drag around the tanks I was responsible for, weighing 20 kilograms each, as well as tons of other gear, and put on my happy face while keeping customers from getting hurt. It's like a combination of retail and warehouse work. It also diluted my love of diving. Even when diving with professionals now, I have a hard time not constantly being on alert, waiting for someone to do something risky, rather than enjoying the dive. Story 9. Foreign Service Officer. You are paid to live in a foreign country and meet interesting people. You get to travel. You are paid tax-free allowances. You also have to defend all government policies and practices to foreigners while keeping a straight face, even the ones you disagree with or are totally inane. You have to politely and respectfully deal with foreigners you know are lying to you, trying to rip you off, corrupt, criminal, or just generally unpleasant. This includes foreign officials, visa applicants, business people, and others. The ambassador acts like they're royalty and expects you to be subservient, when in fact they're nothing special. Administrative regulations mean allowances don't always cover genuine expenses. In most countries, locals think they can overcharge you because you're a diplomat. Diplomatic plates on your car are an invitation for theft. Offices always look like they were furnished with cast-offs from government surplus warehouse rejects. You have a fancy title, but no budget for local initiatives, so you always look stingy. You're the last to know what's going on in office practices and politics, and when you return to headquarters, you find out everything changed while you were away. Genuine promotions are few and far between, which means competition hinges on networking, inflated job appraisals, and cutthroat competition with ruthless people. Postings seem to be assigned to make everyone miserable, with the good gigs going to people the posting officer wants to impress. Story 10. Scientific research. First, you work incredibly hard in undergrad to get accepted to a good grad school. If you're like me and studied biology, that means you're going to be taking the same classes and stressing out about a lot of the same stuff as pre-meds. Then you go to grad school, which lasts on average 8 years, in the sciences. That's most or all of your 20s spent making $26K/year on a student stipend. But hey, at least school is free. Then after you graduate, you've got your PhD and can go work, right? Not really. If you're extremely lucky, you'll get a coveted research job. If you're like the vast majority of people, however, you'll be forced to get a postdoc position. That's where you work under a professor in a lab, just like you always have, and get paid a whopping $40K/year. They also last for only 2 years. And once it's up, it's time to try to get a real career job again, or more likely, apply for yet another postdoc. People can be stuck postdocing for 10+ years. This is the first real piece of the challenge. Twice as many PhDs graduate every year as there are jobs available for them in the sciences. That means there's a ton of competition, all vying for the same tiny handful of professorships. What about industry, you say? Industry has even fewer openings and is a long shot for most since they only want practical experience and skills. You're also still working under someone, unlike being a professor, where you're free to explore any interest you want, kind of. So most people go for being a professor, where the average opening gets 200, 300 extremely well-qualified candidates. But maybe you get lucky and land a job as an assistant professor, entry level. You're now making $60K/year, and you better work hard to get tenure, because if you don't meet your tenure requirements by the time you have your tenure hearing, after about 5-7 years at most places, you're out. And the problem with that is, a typical part of tenure requirements is getting 1 to 2 major grants. The primary grant for biology, for instance, has a funding rate of around 10%. Go to a scientific conference and chat with people, and I guarantee you will have no problem at all finding scientists with stories of applying for that grant for years with no success. Now, let's say you do miraculously make it past that hurdle and get bumped up to associate professor. Now you're making $75K/year and things are smoother. Think you can stop worrying about grants? Not really. Even if you work at a university that still has real tenure, they probably have a clause in there about you funding your own salary through grant money. So no grants = no salary. Even better, as you have your own lab, You're also the one funding your workers' salaries. So if you lose too much grant money, you have to let people go. This happens all the time, even to great labs. Finally, if you've had a successful career, then around the time you're in your 50s or 60s, you'll get promoted to full professor, where you will finally make $100K/year. It's worth noting that scientists' work lives are stressful. Working weekends and holidays is common. Working late is very common. You mess up one detail in an experiment, and you may have just thrown away months of work. You are constantly stressing out if you'll reach the next goal or not. Will I get into grad school? Will I finish grad school? Will I ever get a professorship? Will I ever get grant money? Etc. You get exposed to dangerous stuff like radiation, biohazards, chemical hazards, carcinogens, and more. It's a tough path. Story 11. Trades like welding, pipe fitting, and electrical work are often glamorized on Reddit as a lucrative alternative to many other jobs because of the pay. However, I'm not in a trade, but my family members are, and it's some of the most grueling and demanding work out there. They've faced dangerous situations like solar panels flying away during a storm or lax fire safety at a nuclear power plant. They've worked crazy amounts of overtime just trying to meet impossible deadlines. My husband has been fortunate, but when my dad was in the union, he would get laid off and be out of work for months, doing side jobs to make ends meet. The alternative to this is taking out-of-town jobs and being away from home for months at a time. These jobs take a toll on your body. My husband will most likely need a knee replacement, and my dad had to retire early due to his health. Working for yourself is great if you can balance your books, maintain your licenses, and stay insured, all while dealing with homeowners who balk at the price of rewiring their old houses. I feel like Reddit tries to paint trades as these simple jobs that anyone can do with easy pay, but there's a lot more that goes into it. It's not just your ability to weld, hang drywall, or wire, but also understanding and remembering code requirements, safely using all your tools, and staying sane while figuring out how to meet tight deadlines. I still think anyone should give it a try if they're really interested. Just understand that it's harder work than people like to think. I don't think my husband would do anything differently, but I know my dad actively steered me away from a trade as a kid. Story 12. The nonprofit sector. You go into it wanting to help people, but far too many people are ungrateful, unwilling to help themselves, or complain no matter how much you try. I cannot tell you how many people have made threats even when you've gone well above and beyond for them. So many people abuse the system for freebies. And I've seen people making over $100K a year trying to get free services. The pay is always low unless you're at the executive level. It's ridiculous how much executives make compared to the workers doing 90% of the work. The CEO of my organization makes well into the six figures, while we have to work 3 years to get a 3% raise on our low salary. They also constantly devalue you. You have people with master's degrees working entry-level positions, being bossed around by someone with zero education who's just friends with the CFO or something. You're constantly working with a minimal budget, expected to produce top-notch results. Most volunteers are only there to get hours or a reference and complain a lot. You're constantly battling other nonprofits, even if you're just trying to share resources. You could be doing completely different things and just trying to refer clients back and forth so they can access all available resources, but they'll guard their clients like gold. The amount of shady practices that occur is really sad. Inflation of numbers, total lies, etc. It's disheartening how many places do very little, but are glamorized as doing good. Story 13. Academia. It's not super glamorous, but I hear people talking all the time about university professors sitting around in an ivory tower. It's not like that at all. You spend years in grad school. In my field, it takes 6, 7 years for a PhD student, even if you already have a master's. If you stick it out through grad school and get the doctorate, there's still a good chance that no university will hire you, even if you did good work. Sometimes your particular niche research interest is out of fashion, so you're out of luck. If you are lucky enough to get a tenure-track job in your field, you're constantly balancing teaching, research, writing articles and books, begging for funding, networking at conferences, serving on committees, reviewing other people's work, and generally trying to justify your existence to a crumbling system of higher education that's suffering from budget cuts. Academics usually work in fairly safe environments, but not always. Field work can mean exposure to diseases, parasites, and political violence. Lab work can mean back pain, repetitive motion injuries, and long-term exposure to dangerous substances. The hours alone, I'm in grad school and I work 60, 70 hours per week, grind you down. Story 14. Opera singing. The famous Maria Callas once said that if she could do it all over again, she wouldn't. It takes countless years, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it's hard to hold a day job due to rehearsals. You're constantly bouncing from place to place, and people in music don't always consider you to be a musician. People with regular jobs constantly ask what your real career is, or they do the polar opposite and assume you're some famous diva when you're not. It's incredibly difficult to maintain long-term relationships due to the constant travel. You literally pay hundreds of dollars for job interviews, since that's what auditions are. You perform most holidays since Christmas and Easter are the prime biblical times, which means lots of singing, and New Year's Eve means operetta, or a salute to Vienna, where you sing Johann Strauss Jr. all night. It's rarely fur shawls and champagne, and you work in the evenings and sleep during the day. It makes it difficult if you have a family, especially a young family, because you have to decide whether to work on Christmas to help pay for things or stay home to open presents. It's a string of tough decisions. It's taxing, and a lot of people take breaks. It's truly a passion that drives you forward because it's hard and thankless, and fewer people support it. You really have to love what you do. Opera is the meeting of all the art forms: music, visual art, dance, literature, and acting. Please give it a shot before dismissing it. Please support the arts. Story 15. Forensic entomology has some strange misconceptions propagated by TV shows like Bones. You're not embroiled in some cerebral battle with a mastermind who's taunting you with codes involving insects or poetic metaphors. Instead, you're extracting larvae from decomposing cadavers, often from suicide victims or vagrants. You're exposed to the unpleasant aspects of decomposition, as well as the occasional unrepentant criminal you've implicated who laughs during your testimony. Academia is always looming over your career. There's nepotism, political maneuvering around any unethical research, and the constant struggle to secure funding for things like a body farm. I spend more time debating with stubborn academics about innovations in such a niche field than I do with cadavers anymore. The bureaucracy isn't something I ever anticipated. You'd think research into decomposition rates in an increasingly obese society wouldn't be contentious, but you'd be so wrong. Story 16. I was a touring DJ for a while. It sounds like it would be really fun, and sometimes it was. But the reality is that you spend a lot of time traveling, spending time in cities you don't know, around people you don't know, before playing a gig that might or might not be good, and then going back to a hotel and sleeping alone before traveling back the next day. The hour or two that you're actually jing is the fun part. Everything else around it is boring and lonely. Furthermore, the times that you're working are usually when your friends are socializing. So I missed out on a lot of time with the people I cared about, missing birthdays, celebrations, social events, etc. Occasionally, I'd know someone in the city where I was DJing, or sometimes the promoters were nice folks, and we'd have a good time. But that wasn't very common. I was living hand to mouth, and if I didn't get a gig that week or month, I'd be worrying about whether I could pay rent or feed myself. My manager at the time was pushing me to write and produce more commercial-sounding music like Calvin Harris, but I just didn't want to do that. It sounds like I'm being really down on the whole thing. It was a great experience, and I'm grateful I got the chance to do it at all. I make music as a hobby now, which has really reignited my love for it and taken the pressure off. Story 17. Not quite what OP is looking for, but academia in general is a potentially challenging career path. It's so competitive that a lot of people burn out and become shells of themselves just from the stress and pressure of grad school and the job market. A lot of people put pressure on themselves to end up in a top-tier university, but that just isn't in the cards for everyone. So many people end up broken. I just say that for anyone considering academia after a PhD, be ready to give a lot and get very little in return. Now, all that said, I'm one of the lucky ones and have an absolute dream job, for me, at a mid-level university. Not Ivy League or even R1, but public and stable. When I accepted the position, I literally had friends offering me condolences that I hadn't gone to a more competitive place, and I was like, thanks, but I really don't want to spend all of my energy on other people's perceptions of my importance. Sure, I don't get paid a lot, but they also gave my spouse a tenure-track job. My kid never wonders where his next meal is coming from, and my colleagues are, for the most part, decent human beings and not just grant chasers. Story 18. Social media manager. That's the career path I chose. A lot of people glamorize it, depending on which field of social media you manage. I chose technology and gaming. It's literally nothing but people complaining to you about things that are beyond your control. And for the most part, all you can say is, I will pass your feedback along. People hate to hear that. Trust me, there are things I would love to tell you, but I'm not allowed to. I'm guilty of complaining to other communities too, but I try not to let it get the best of me. To be really successful at it, you need to be a pro at separating your personal feelings and life from the job, and you cannot let people get under your skin. Story 19. Commercial pilot. My brother, who's currently an A380 pilot for British Airways, has had an interesting start to his career, to say the least. First, everyone wants to be a pilot, so before you even apply, you need to get your CV looking like flying is your entire life. He worked at a local aerodrome doing aircraft moving, refueling, basic repairs, you name it, he did it for a year. He got about 15 hours of flying time from people there over the year. While doing that, he was also in the Air Training Corps, doing his gliding and flying scholarships, 50 hours of winch gliders and powered flights with a solo flight at the end of each course. Once he did that, he applied as one of 3,000 applicants for 8 positions in this flight training school. That's just for the right to be trained, which he got after 4 rounds of interviews and aptitude testing. Then he had to take out a pound $120K loan against our dad's house to actually pay for the training. 2 years of training later, with a number of tests he had to retake or drop out entirely, he got his license. Amazing. Then the volcano in Iceland erupted and caused billions in damage to the European airline economy, including a number of airline layoffs. Now there were no new pilot positions for another year, during which time my brother had to keep his CPL current, which costs almost £20K in total with sims and training. This money came from family. My brother got a job doing basic IT work in the head office for the training company he trained with. This meant he was able to be there every single day, asking the employment desk for any new positions. They had a contract with a number of airlines that they would be given a certain number of positions out of the total made available. A year later, he got a job with BA City Flyer, flying from London City as his base of operations. The pay was £26K a year in London, and he had to pay back his loan, still at £800 per month. Safe to say it was another 3 years of us helping him out with food, etc. Now it's settled down once he reached 5,000 hours, which is like the point at which you can get positions with other airlines. He applied for BA and got in as a first officer. From there, he did 5 years and then applied for long haul on the A380, which he got and is now FO on that amazing aircraft. But yeah, holy cow, it's expensive and hard. Story 20. Automotive technician. First off, cars are getting more advanced each year. You never stop having to learn what some engineer dreamed up to justify their pay. Second, the computer doesn't just tell you what's wrong. No, that's not how it works. The common misconception is that the computer runs the diagnostic. In practice, each code is a maze you must solve using, gasp, your experience, knowledge, and brain. It's a starting point that tells you what maze you're in. That's it. No magic wand of diagnostic goodness. Third, that diagnostic only pays you so much. If it kicks your butt, you still get paid the same amount. No extra time for you having to learn about the magnetic ride control. Have fun with that. Fourth, because their grandpa or dad did it under a shade tree, it's assumed to be easy. Technicians, note I'm not using the word mechanic, have to be able to properly troubleshoot electrical systems. Did you know that on average, a new car has more than 40 computers in it that all talk to each other? Fifth, you're perceived as less intelligent because you work on cars. This one annoys me the most. Let me tell you something about the rocket science I do daily so Karen can get her coffee from Starbucks. This stuff is hard. I cannot stress this enough. One computer in a modern car has exponentially more power than the Apollo rockets had. Sixth, turning a profit. To be successful, you have to be able to think for yourself and be fast at it. But Karen wants to bring me a part off Amazon that, 1/3 of the time, doesn't work. Then for them being cheap, they want me to put another one in for free. Yeah, no. Seventh, auto manufacturers are making vehicles more complicated while also cutting the amount of labor they pay under warranty. So yeah, be smarter and get paid less. Good lesson. Eighth, the hours. As a tech, you get paid on billable hours. The industry calls this flag hour. If a water pump pays 2.3 hours and it takes you all day because a bolt decided to break off in the timing cover, sorry. You get 2.3 hours and maybe an extra hour for the 6 hours of frustration you went through to get the bolt out. Plus, you stay late to get things finished to make enough money to make ends meet. Ninth, constantly fixing something someone else either messed up or did half-heartedly. It gets old. Just let me fix it in the first place instead of paying some poor kid on Craigslist who doesn't know what a phase detractor is. If you're still reading, congrats on getting to the end of my rant. Sorry for being a sourpuss, but this job gets old sometimes. Story 21. Pursuing film in LA. Shows like Entourage and reality TV make it seem like people in LA working in the film industry are all living this exciting life. But the truth is, Louisiana often feels like an underdeveloped city with expensive restaurants. It's bizarre how underdeveloped the city itself is, from the roads to the lack of public transportation to the justice system. When you're finally on set and making movies, there can be some level of glamour, usually in the form of a good lunch. But people don't realize what a long and arduous road it is, filled with disappointment and disrespect, and how unglamorous set life really is. If your day ends in 12 hours, you're happy because you're on schedule. LA and the film industry are not as advanced as they present themselves. There's still this stigma, even in LA, that you're a dreamer or a joker until you've reached a certain level of financial gain and accolades, as opposed to a more European idea of being an artist on a journey who deserves respect. But the film industry in LA is really small, and breaking in is very hard. It sounds cool to hear someone say, "Oh, I'm following my dream." It always sounds so dreamy. But following this dream of film has been met with way more challenges than I imagined, and LA has proven to be much more backwards. Much of how backward the film industry still is can be found in studies conducted by the Gina Davis Institute on Gender and Media, or in how certain cases have been handled by the justice system. LA has a long way to go. Story 22. Judging by this thread, I guess working in tech, web development, automation testing isn't so bad then. You get paid pretty well, and there are more jobs than people who can do them, so if your workplace is bad, you can pretty easily move on. You'll likely do this at least every 18 months anyway, because the easiest way to get promoted is to go elsewhere. Same for pay raises too. You need to be loyal to yourself primarily, and understand that unless you're the exact perfect fit, you will never have a forever job. I got a 10.5 thousand pounds pay rise just by going to work somewhere else. Closer to pound 15K with the benefits. The main downsides are when you work near admin workers who have tough conditions, and rather than asking to have the same as you, flexible hours, paid conferences, work from home, they tend to get upset and just complain. I'd be happy if they got the same benefits, to be honest. The job is pretty sweet though, mostly only a pain when the product team gets involved and stops you from doing necessary infrastructure work because it doesn't directly convert to a cash value. Also, most of the work you do will be putting someone else out of a job, and society doesn't yet have the infrastructure to support this level of automation. When we build self-service tills, we tend to just let people go rather than making their lives easier. A lot of the time, you'll spend thinking, and when you work somewhere that values you, you do very little actual work. Most of it is thinking about your solution. It's great how learning is mostly encouraged, and you need to do it to stay up to date with other places. Some places don't support this, so it lets you know you need to leave because if you stay, you'll fall behind. Also, for the salary you get, you can end up getting into hobbies like Warhammer or Magic, the Gathering, without it being an issue. I tend to just do expensive courses and then factor it into my next pay review request so I can claim it back the hard way. You do need to be comfortable with the idea that absolutely no one knows what is going on, including yourself, and some people are just good at pretending they know what's going on. Working from home is great, but you generally feel under a lot of pressure to be productive, and you kind of just aren't. Some things about the job stink, but mostly it's weirdo politics or just our own mental ideas of what we're doing. I think with teaching kids to code now in school, the bubble will end in the next 10 years or so make sure you get into management, something very technical, or a role like an agile coach. There are also so many grifters, especially at conferences. You'll spend time repeating yourself a lot because some of your ideas are just hard to parse, but also a lot of incompetent people can get into your organization, which can make your life more difficult, especially when you're senior to them. Your success is based on their success. Mostly it's good though, I'd recommend it, especially software testing. It's mostly the same money as development. But there's a better community and you're kind of unofficially unionized because of that. Story 23. I was a musician for a long time. I worked in service jobs while I was home, toured a few months a year, and made records I really loved. My band eventually ended up on a mid-sized indie label, and we had a pretty awesome run before all of us got older and couldn't justify being broke and gone all the time. I had friends who really went at it as a career, and maybe it doesn't kill the passion, but you certainly have to apply it differently. You play local shows, it's fun. You patch together a regional tour, it's a blast. Do the US a couple of times and maybe even make it to Europe and see your record mentioned in magazines. Awesome. You sign to a bigger label. You need a publicist. You can't get a real career going because you're constantly leaving for tour. You need a lawyer to look over contracts. You can't book your own tours anymore because you've outgrown the all-ages clubs and basement scene. So you look for a booking agent who may or may not care about you and sends you out for weeks at a time with bands you don't like. Your publicist insists you have a story and talks you up in a way that makes you sound full of yourself. You go from being the big band on a small label to the small band potentially getting lost in the shuffle on a big label. The label is on you to perform, as in sell records, streams, or whatever. Your approach to writing changes because this is your livelihood, whereas your old records had a certain purity to them that you're not likely to replicate again. You don't write music when you're inspired. You're on a touring, recording cycle, so you get to work. You forget where you are since you sleep in the van most of the time driving between shows. My roommate was in a huge band. They were on a relentless touring cycle. They'd do smaller markets headlining, then go out as support with a certain kind of band, go overseas, come back and do support for a different genre headliner, go to Europe and do the festival circuit in the summer, and so on for 2 years. He wouldn't be home for more than 2 weeks at a time. He was sort of a perfect roommate in that respect. When they finally got home, they'd get into writing, recording mode, write a record, record it, and have a new record to tour on, and start the cycle again. I know people in bands that are household names. It's their job, and most of them hate one another past a certain point after being in such close quarters for years. The thing is, it's hard to quit. If you do a new project, you usually have to start over and also deal with fans who want you to write their favorite record over and over. Story 24. Welding is often listed as a lucrative trade when people push for trade schools as an alternative to traditional college. So my son decided to get his welding certification. One of his classmates got a job making good money welding pipelines. However, during his first week, another welder was thrown 100 feet due to leftover vapors igniting. My son's friend quit after that, saying it wasn't worth the risk to his life for a $1.20/hour job. The welding jobs my son has found so far start between $10, $12 per hour, which isn't much, especially considering that welders face a high risk of lung cancer, among other health issues. Although raises come quickly in the first year, bringing the pay to a little over $30K/year, only high-risk or highly specialized welders make a really decent income. We are still encouraging him to consider further specialization. He ended up working at a factory running a computerized welder making rolling tool chests. While it helps to know welding, he could have gotten that job straight out of high school. The factory does offer pretty nice benefits, but he doesn't realize how poorly some companies treat their employees these days. He's only making $28K a year, not the high earnings often talked about in the trade. Story 25. Being a medical doctor, especially in surgery, involves long hours. 12-hour days are the norm, and 24-hour shifts aren't uncommon. There's no personal life, no time or energy for hobbies or going to the gym. The responsibility and stress are immense. Sometimes I can't sleep at night worrying if the child I operated on will bleed because I might have closed up too quickly. I'm still a resident and have done about 4 years of general surgery and traumatology. I only needed another 2 years to be board certified in Germany, but one day after a 24-hour shift and then a 9-hour surgery, I couldn't walk anymore. I had ruptured a ligament in my right foot, not from trauma, but simply from exhaustion. I healed and changed my residency to urology. I still have many operations and shifts, but I love the new robotics and rhinoscopic operations. It feels like when I had time to play video games as a child. To be honest, many of my colleagues and I often think about quitting and doing something else, but we've been doing this for years and don't have the skills or patience to do something else. At least I have no debt, and the pay is good. I also get 6 weeks of paid vacation a year, so it's not too bad, but I never recommend my job to any kid that asks. I always suggest doing something else like IT or software development. Story 26. The video game industry often seems like a dream job for young college students, but the reality is quite different, especially in the big companies. If you start an entry-level QA, you'll find yourself playing the same section of a game over and over again. Imagine playing just one level of Mario for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. Not the full game, just that one section. And it's an incomplete level, so it'll likely be missing many of the blocks and coins that will be gradually added over weeks. But you still have to play it despite it being unfinished, and write reports on every single error and bug you find so the programmers can fix it. Programmers might think their job will be cool and glamorous, but it's basically the same as any other office job. You'll have a cubicle, attend numerous meetings as the direction of the game changes based on feedback from QA testers, and you'll be given difficult goals with little budget. Expect to work 50-60 plus hours a week during crunch, which can last several months, as they try to get the game ready for day one launch because the release date was already set. In larger companies, you're more of a cog in the machine, with your role very specialized, working only on certain aspects of the game. This means your work becomes very repetitive since you don't wear multiple hats. Above all else, you are pretty much disposable, especially at the lower levels, because the glamour of the industry will attract 10 fresh-from-college replacements who are eager to leap at the job if you leave. As a result, your pay will also be less than the industry standard, since so many people want the position. Story 27. The television industry often seems like it's all fun and glamour, but the reality is that it usually involves extremely long hours, exhausting work, and unusual shift patterns that can impact weekends. It's one of those industries where you have to really want to be there, or you'll end up quitting. On top of that, when you're at the bottom of the ladder, you're often expected to work for free or below minimum wage. You're also likely to be the first to receive abuse for trivial matters. Like, I said 1.5 sugars, not 1 1/3, which can make it really stressful work. I'm now at a stage in my career where the hours are lessened, and I'm less exposed to toxic people because I no longer work on shoots. But honestly, for every nice person, there are 2 or 3 others looking to undercut you so they can progress in their careers. Story 28. Being a chef can seem glamorous, especially when people watch shows featuring celebrity chefs like Gordon Ramsay. However, I've seen and heard many people talking about making it in the industry, as if you'll eventually live the dream, have an army of underlings, or run a small, busy kitchen where you get to do whatever you want. But this is completely false in my experience. I started washing dishes when I was 16, cooked on a restaurant line at 17, began my apprenticeship at 18, went to culinary school, became a sous chef at 19, and a corporate chef at 21. By 24, I burned out and changed careers because I didn't want to lose my love and passion for cooking. In my culinary management program, everyone, including me, had these delusions of grandeur where they would travel the world with nothing but their chef whites and taste what all these exotic countries had to offer. Not a single one of the 90 people in my class did that. Only about 25 of them made it to graduation, myself not included, and I still keep in contact with almost all of them through social media. And this was just one generation in one school in Ontario. If you're lucky and can avoid the crippling alcoholism that often comes hand in hand with the industry, you'll still be consistently overworked and underpaid in a highly demanding career. And you can be replaced at the drop of a hat, so you'll overwork yourself trying to stand out from the crowd for a promotion you may never receive, especially if the owner of your workplace is also the head chef, who has no desire to retire or hand over the reins. Story 29. Being a registered nurse in a hospital is often glorified on social media. You see pictures of nurses who are happy and glowing or beautifully exhausted after a long shift of holding a grandma's hand as she peacefully passes away. That rarely happens, maybe twice in a career. Nurses are conditioned, without realizing it, to talk about how much they love the profession while endlessly complaining about it in the nurses' station. Why does it suck? Picture this. For 13 hours, they say 12-hour shifts, but it's not. You're tasked with meeting the needs of 6 patients, depending on your specialty. Every single decision you make is questioned by staff, patients, and families. You can't do anything longer than 2 minutes without being interrupted by an alarm, usually a pointless one, or a family member asking the same question you've answered 20 times. Oh, and your coworker wants to talk to you about her problems the entire time. The only way to do this job correctly and improve the experience for the patients is to break the rules and risk getting fired. The entire career of an RN is living in a gray area of ethics and policy. For example, you tripped and fell 6 months ago on a branch in your yard. You are now a fall risk. Because of that, I can't let you go to the bathroom alone to prevent you from falling. It doesn't matter if you ran a marathon yesterday. If I leave and, heaven forbid, you trip on your underwear, I get written up, and there's an hour of paperwork, meetings, etc. And you just won yourself more alarms, more barriers, and decreased privacy. Hospital administration will preach about improving nurse autonomy while rolling out a new set of rules restricting what we're allowed to do. The workload for RNs is completely, unapologetically unrealistic. You're expected to tackle that workload while being short-staffed with failing equipment, all while not making any mistakes. You are the whipping post for the entire patient-hospital experience. Patients, doctors, and hospital administration all blame you when something doesn't go right, even when it's entirely not your fault. You're expected to navigate that and keep patient satisfaction up. Everybody expects you to just handle things outside of work. You're so exhausted from doing favors for people at work that you go on autopilot. When you clock out and get home, you're too tired to enforce boundaries with loved ones, so you continue to do favors for them without even realizing it. This conditions them, and the cycle repeats. This career is extremely hard on your mental and physical health. Not because of the gory things you see, but because of the constant onslaught of being overwhelmed at every turn, mainly by hospital administration, the staffing office, and patients' family members. Story 30. Being a musician is challenging, to say the least. It's an insanely competitive profession. You spend thousands of hours practicing to become proficient, thousands of dollars on professional-grade instruments, and then there are the travel expenses to and from gigs. All of this only to fight for maybe $100 per gig that could last up to 3 or 4 hours. Most gigs are in city areas, where the cost of living is high, making it difficult to live close to where you work. As a result, many musicians don't make much more than $20-30K a year, so living in accessible areas close to where they work often isn't feasible. This drives up transport costs, or you end up living in less desirable neighborhoods closer to where you perform. If you do manage to make it a bit bigger, the money gets slightly better. But the rampant issues like alcohol, drug abuse, and personal or body-related problems often catch people early or tear them apart in the long run. Musicians work closely with a lot of service industry folk, and both professions are notorious for having substance problems. Story 31. Working as a franchise hotel agent, especially on the third shift, is far from glamorous. Managers often care only about the ratings that corporate sees and will do anything for a 5-star rating. They may punish you by threatening random penalties, including illegal pay deductions. Guests are even more entitled than customers in retail. They will cite nearly anything to try and get a free room. The worst excuse I heard was a guest who wanted an immediate refund because he couldn't sleep on the bed. It was too lumpy, and he had been there less than an hour. He quickly protested when I checked the room, where I found used items and lipstick on the white comforter. No refund. You can get sexually harassed every night, and your boss may do nothing because you're being too nice to them. Or they desperately need the business of just one person in a packed hotel. I've also been assaulted a couple of times. Drunks and people on drugs will sometimes make a mess in the elevator or even strip in front of you. This has happened more than once. There are also guests who bring in bed bugs and live with them in extended stays for months, without saying a word, leaving rooms unusable for days after they leave. We once called CPS because a woman was using hotel rags as diapers for her infant, and the room was filthy. You might also encounter spouses demanding room numbers to catch their partner in an affair, or questioning a charge on their account, unaware that their partner is cheating. There are some upsides when guests buy you food or presents, but it doesn't erase the fact that some seriously messed up stuff happens. Also, if an extended stay tells you they've never had bed bugs, they're probably lying. Story 32. I'm a nurse, and while it's rewarding in some ways, it's also exhausting. 12-hour shifts are the norm, with lots of time spent on your feet and multitasking. Depending on where you work, you might have up to 8 patients. The most I ever had was 7, and I started to break down and cry because all I could do was pass medications and move on. I couldn't care for anyone the way I wanted to. Patients and families get angry because I'm not there for them as soon as they need me, and I'd really like to be. But depending on who is the sickest and what my tasks are, some people just have to get more attention than others. I've spent 12 hours without sitting down, without eating, drinking, or using the bathroom. The pay isn't all that great either. Now I work in the ICU, where I see critically ill children who go through so much pain. Seeing them pass away is really tough. Of all people, children shouldn't have to be sick. They shouldn't be relapsing from cancer at age 7. Shouldn't be in a coma because they got shot in a drive-by shooting. Shouldn't be there because they were abused so severely that all their little bones are broken. Story 33. Trucking might seem simple, just moving goods from point A to B, but it's far from the glamorous image seen in movies. In reality, you spend days, weeks, even months living in a metal/plastic/fiberglass box. You live in isolation, eating whatever food you can find on the road, and often get treated worse than a dog. Sometimes, you're told you can't use the bathroom because someone else made a mess. And then you're held up for hours while loading or unloading. Family life? What family? You're never home when the bad stuff happens and you're needed, or when the good stuff happens and you want to be there. Sometimes you work for poor pay, but you keep America moving, right? You might never actually go hungry, but you'd better like fast food and gas station snacks. Trucking is one of the few occupations you can get into with minimal education and make decent money. But in exchange, you're a slave to the demands of your company and their customers, especially in the beginning of your career. And don't even mention all the laws and regulations you have to comply with. The customers don't care about getting you processed because when their shift ends, they're going home to their own bed while you're still sitting there, waiting. Hungry and probably stinky because you didn't get a chance to shower. Now, can I interest you in a new career in trucking? Sign on the line and we'll have fresh meat in the seat for a while until we burn you out. And when you wear out or break, we'll replace you and get another newbie. It's easy. Everyone knows truck drivers are a dime a dozen.